On October 2, 1992, a routine soccer match in Sao Paulo's Carandiru Penitentiary ended with a punch over a clothesline dispute. Within 4 hours, 341 military police officers would storm Latin America's largest prison complex, armed with 5,000 rounds of ammunition and orders to restore control. The operation would last exactly 30 minutes. When the shooting stopped, 111 prisoners lay dead, and Brazil would face its darkest hour in modern prison history. Military police claimed it was crowd control, but evidence would later reveal something far more sinister. So, how did a minor dispute transform into a massacre that would haunt Brazil for decades? Let's find out. The foundation of a nightmare. Carandiru Penitentiary began with noble intentions when it opened its doors in 1920. Designed by engineer-architect Samuel das Neves and originally called the Institute of Regeneration, this facility was meant to be a beacon of progressive criminal justice in South America. For 2 decades, it functioned as intended, housing a maximum of 1,200 inmates with exemplary conditions that attracted international visitors. Austrian writer Stefan Zweig visited in the 1920s and praised its exemplary cleanliness and hygiene, describing how prisoners baked bread, prepared medicines, grew vegetables, and attended classes. Even the renowned anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss made visits to study what many considered a model institution. The prison operated like a self-sufficient community where rehabilitation took precedence over punishment. However, this golden age would come to a devastating end. By the 1950s, overcrowding had begun to strangle the facility's original mission. The prison underwent a major transformation in 1956, expanding its capacity and transitioning from a penitentiary to a detention center. This seemingly administrative change marked the beginning of a downward spiral that would culminate in unimaginable tragedy. By 1992, Carandiru had become the largest prison in Latin America, but this distinction came at a horrific cost. The facility, designed to house 3,000 inmates, was bursting with over 8,000 prisoners, creating a population density that defied human dignity. In some cells, 20 prisoners were stacked in spaces designed for 5. The conditions inside had deteriorated to medieval standards. A single guard often oversaw 600 inmates, making meaningful supervision impossible. Medical staff were reluctant to enter certain areas, leading to untreated conditions and the spread of infectious diseases. During the 1980s, a severe AIDS epidemic ran rife through the prison, claiming countless lives while administrators looked the other way. Pavilion 9, where the massacre would unfold, housed up to 2,000 inmates in conditions that challenged basic human survival. Dr. Durazio Varela, who worked in the prison conducting AIDS prevention programs, described sorting cells where 30 prisoners slept on the floor, squeezed together and trying not to touch their companions' feet. The infrastructure consisted of old, poorly maintained gray buildings with 5 floors, creating a maze of human suffering. Many inmates had never been tried or convicted, with some waiting years for their day in court, despite having the legal right to trial within 81 days. This judicial paralysis meant that hundreds of people remained trapped in this hellscape without knowing their fate, creating an atmosphere of desperation and hopelessness that permeated every corner of the facility, the spark that ignited hell. October 2, 1992 started like any other day in Pavilion 9, but beneath the surface, tensions were reaching a breaking point. The date carried additional significance as it coincided with the impeachment proceedings against President Fernando Collor, adding political instability to an already volatile situation. Brazil was still finding its footing 7 years after emerging from 21 years of military dictatorship, and the democratic institutions remained fragile. The incident began innocuously during a recreational soccer match in the prison yard. What started as friendly competition between inmates quickly escalated when 2 prisoners, known as Barba and Coelho, clashed over issues related to the use of the clothesline. This seemingly trivial dispute erupted into physical aggression, spreading like wildfire through the overcrowded pavilion. Pavilion 9 was particularly volatile because it served as a sorting area for new arrivals. These prisoners hadn't yet learned the complex unwritten rules of prison coexistence and remained emotionally raw from their recent separation from the outside world. When conflicts arose between people who had known each other on the streets, violence often followed, creating a powder keg atmosphere that required constant vigilance from experienced inmates to maintain minimal order. As the fight escalated, it transformed from a personal dispute into a broader uprising. Prisoners who had endured years of inhumane conditions saw an opportunity to voice their grievances. However, contrary to typical prison riots, the inmates displayed their willingness to negotiate by throwing their weapons from windows and hanging truce flags from the prison walls, showing they sought dialogue rather than violence. The prison administrator's response would prove catastrophic. Instead of attempting negotiation or deploying riot control measures, they immediately called in the military police of São Paulo state. Colonel Ubiratan Guimarães, the commanding officer, made the fateful decision to storm Pavilion 9 with overwhelming force. What happened next violated every principle of crowd control and prisoner management. The military police, who were not in uniform, entered the pavilion with weapons drawn and began systematically moving through the building. Within approximately 20 to 30 minutes, they had fired between 3,500 and 5,000 bullets, with 515 rounds found embedded in prisoners' bodies. Eyewitness accounts revealed the true horror of what transpired. Prisoners ran for cover as police entered, but the cramped conditions offered little protection. Many victims were found with bullet holes in the back of their heads, indicating execution-style killings. Hands among the dead were found in front of faces or behind heads, suggesting defensive positions as prisoners tried desperately to protect themselves. The systematic nature of the killings became clear through forensic evidence. Each prisoner received an average of 4.04 shots, with some receiving as many as 16 rounds. This level of ammunition expenditure far exceeded what would be necessary for crowd control, indicating deliberate execution rather than riot suppression. Perhaps most tellingly, no police officers were injured during the entire operation, despite claims that they were defending themselves against dangerous prisoners. This fact alone contradicted official narratives about a chaotic firefight and pointed toward a one-sided massacre of defenseless inmates. The cover-up attempts. In the aftermath of the killing, authorities attempted to manipulate the crime scene and control the narrative. Police forced surviving prisoners to carry the bodies out of their cells, deliberately contaminating evidence that could have determined individual responsibility for specific deaths. Some prisoners were killed while performing this grisly task, adding to the overall death toll. The massacre occurred on the eve of municipal elections, and officials feared the incident would damage the right-wing party's chances of removing the Workers' Party from São Paulo's mayoralty. Consequently, news of the massacre was suppressed for more than 24 hours, allowing time for evidence tampering and narrative coordination. When the story finally broke, the images that emerged shocked the world. Photographs of naked bodies lined up on concrete floors became symbols of Brazilian state violence and institutional barbarism. These haunting images traveled internationally, forcing Brazil to confront the brutal reality of its prison system on a global stage. Amnesty International investigators who arrived within days documented the grossly inadequate handling of ballistic evidence, which amounted to an attempted cover-up by officials. Their report provided strong evidence that São Paulo's governor and Secretary of Public Security had abdicated their responsibilities by handing complete control to military police, making them equally responsible for the outcome. The pursuit of accountability for the Carandiru massacre exposed deep flaws in Brazil's justice system. Colonel Guimarães was sentenced in 2001 to 632 years in prison, yet never served a day. His conviction was overturned in 2006 after he argued he was following orders, the same defense rejected at Nuremberg. Even more shocking, he was elected to Congress in 2002 with campaign number 14.111, a direct reference to the 111 victims. Other trials brought no real justice. Between 2013 and 2014, 74 officers received lengthy sentences but none were enforced. In 2016, the court annulled the trials, claiming the massacre was self-defense and that ballistic evidence couldn't link officers to specific deaths. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights condemned Brazil as early as 2000, calling the event indiscriminate slaughter. Of 154 claims filed by families, only 25 were compensated after decades of delay. The prison closed in 2002 and was demolished a year later, replaced by a public park. Yet the most lasting consequence was the birth of the Primeiro Comando da Capital, or PCC, a criminal organization whose founders explicitly cited Carandiru as their motivation. Today, the PCC dominates Brazil's prison system and drug trade. Culturally, Carandiru lives on through films, music, and art that preserve the memory of the 111 victims. But politically, the case set a precedent of impunity. Amnesty International notes that only 8% of murders in Brazil lead to prosecution, ensuring state violence faces little consequence. But what's your take on the Carandiru massacre? Was it a riot gone wrong or a state-sanctioned execution? Share your perspective in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe for more powerful history content.